Van Gogh and Britain Review. Unfolding narrative depicts story of the self-taught artist London Ev. Van Gogh and Britain might sound an odd title for a show, since he never painted anything here. And yet, if this, in an unfolding narrative, we absorb the story of his development as a self-taught artist, we see the influence on him in his early 20s of British artistic and literary culture, as well as political and social ideas. He lived in Lambeth. Landscape paintings he saw in by Constable and others, including the Dutch painter Meindert Habermas' famous scene of a tree-lined avenue, offering a looming perspective view make you think it is a deliberate triggering by the curators view of Van Gogh walking to work with his painting equipment out to the fields towards the end of his life. This image of solitary creativity is provoked subtly near the beginning of the show by beautiful paintings of trees which impressed Van Gogh, and is then given an explosive return right at the end in the form of works by Francis Bacon from the 50s depicting Van Gogh rather literally, even illustratively, walking in the fields. Black trees flash. The Bacons are everything. Van Gogh is not flamboyant, egotistical, grandstanding. They are influenced. Van Gogh had a 10-year career as an artist, beginning when he was 27. At 35, during his career, he produced about 860 oil paintings, the majority of which were done in these last 2 years. He did not work. The Van Gogh mad look, then, is really his look of experimental color, picturing the world with color organization that has its own logic. If the world is he combines the simple beauty of design, drawn from Japanese prints which had only just begun to be imported to France, with the spontaneous manipulation of thick paint that characterizes post-impressionist artworks by painters he met in Paris. He thinks about ink. Out of all that comes his pictures of suffering humanity, sorrow, the dignity of everyday life, the richness of human experience seen in poor people's faces and poses, and the beauty of nature and the countryside. We get a strong impression from the show of trees in art, both as life's ordinary background and also as symbolic objects. Van Gogh painted with Bacon. It's a harsh take, wildly engaging, and nothing really to do with Van Gogh, in the sense that those other painters really are followers but disappear a bit in his shadow. Bacon holds his own. Van Gogh and Britain is at Tate Britain, SW1, from March 27 UNTIL August 11th. Share this review.
Raindrop, drop top, smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park pot.